every day. Yeah, I know, when I compliment her, she won't believe me. And it's so sad to think that she don't see what I see. But every time she asks me, do I look okay? I say, when I see your face, there's not a thing that I would change. 'Cause you're amazing, just the way you are. And when you smile, the whole world stops and stares for a while. 'Cause girl, you're amazing, just the way you are. Her lips, I could kiss them all day if she'd let me. Her laugh, she hates, but I think it's so sexy. She's so beautiful, and I tell her every day. Oh, you know, I never ask you to change. If perfect's what you're searching for, then just stay the same. So don't even bother asking if you look okay. You know I'll say, when I see your face.
Good morning, good morning, good morning. A little aspirational music this morning. So if you're looking for love, you are great just the way you are. No, I messed up those lyrics, but a little upbeat music for today's event. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We're excited for the great turnout this morning. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Mitch Little, Executive Director for the Office of Community Empowerment and Opportunity. I greet you from the native lands of the Lenape peoples, which began in the long ago time with the emergence of the turtle and the earth that formed on its back. From this first earth, the first tree grew, and so did the first sprouts. These sprouts grew and became first man and first woman, and so the people first came to be. Welcome again. The Office of Community Empowerment and Opportunity, known as CEO, is the city's community action agency. Community action agencies were established in 1964 by President Lyndon Johnson as part of the war on poverty to serve vulnerable communities, essentially by engaging affected communities to set priorities and solutions to meet their unique needs. So inclusion is in the DNA of CEO and community action. CEO's mission is to provide leadership on issues of economic justice by advancing racial equity and inclusive growth to ensure that all Philadelphians might share in the city's prosperous future. So we serve as a funder, an advocate, convener, and connector, which is what really brings us here today. We believe in community and the ties that connect us. Our destinies are intertwined. So this is silo busting work for us, and we believe that is work that we all should be invested in. We're happy to share, as you might have noticed, that this webinar is being recorded and will be emailed out with some other material later. So that brings us to today's conversation. Today's conversation is about power in the form of participatory grantmaking, which is the process of shifting power of the purse and decision-making from institutions and groups that have traditionally held it to the communities that are most affected by the problems we're trying to address. This practice has been a part of philanthropy and government for decades, but over the last several years, in the wake of the racial reckoning, there has been a shift in the number of foundations and government agencies using this approach. So in the past 3 or 4 years or so, institutions like the Ford Foundation and the Fund for Shared Insight have issued reports that highlight the increased interest in participatory grant making. The shift has been important because the traditional approach to philanthropy and even government contracts has disproportionately left out organizations led by and serving communities of color. The unrestricted net assets of Black-led organizations are 70% smaller than white-led organizations, according to a Bridgespan analysis. Traditional top-down grant making is proof positive of the age-old adage, you always get, you always do what you've done, you'll always get what you got. But if we truly value equity, particularly as government, we must shift power to those who've been robbed of it, and not just giving them a seat at the table, but acknowledging them when they're at the head of the table and join them or build a new table together. So I would probably suspect that I'm preaching to the choir a bit. The purpose of today's discussion is to grow this local community of practice. And that really means that we learn by doing. So today we'll share lessons learned and figure out how we use this pivotal moment to make this shift sustainable. So with that, I'm happy to bring in our panelists who will introduce themselves and tell you a little bit more about their involvement in participatory grant making before we begin our discussion. So we'll start with Caitlin, then Damaris, Latrista, and Sarah. Caitlin?
Amazing. Hi, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. And I'm excited to be here for this conversation this morning. And so my name is Caitlin O'Brien. I am the Director of Learning and Community Impact at the Scattergood Foundation, which is a philanthropic organization really focused on mental health and substance use disorders, taking a broad view of mental health and taking a public health approach to that work. And I think one of the reasons that I'm here today is that one of the projects that I oversee is the Community Fund for Immigrant Wellness, which is really focused on supporting emotional health and well-being for immigrants and refugees in Greater Philadelphia. It started in 2017, really with the bringing together of a group of community-based immigrant serving organizations that all touch different areas of health and well-being, and has since given out more than $1 million to organizations across the region and through 3 cycles. And we're kind of gearing up for our 4th cycle of grant making. So stay tuned for that. And I'm excited to talk more about it.
Thank you.
Yes, good morning. My name is Damaris. I am the Director's Office. I direct the community relations and strategic initiatives. This started a project.
Sorry, Damaris, we're having a bit of an audio issue. Damaris, can we circle back to you? We're having a bit of an audio issue. So why don't we try Latrista and Sarah and then circle back.
Hi, everyone. My name is Latrista Webb. I am the founder of the Elevation Project. The Elevation Project is a community organization here in West Philadelphia. We are a reentry violence prevention program specifically for men who are formerly incarcerated or at risk of incarceration. We run a small business incubator, which we call a transformative business center for men who want to start their own business. So you come here, you create a business plan, you get a stipend to register your business with the state, and then you get full use of our office and all of the equipment here to run your business. We have been in existence since 2015, and at that time we offer classes in prisons and community correction centers across the Philadelphia area. I also have sat on community grant making, giving circles, and with Bread and Roses.
Morning, everyone. My name is Sarah McKinstry-Wu. I'm here joining you from the Bread and Roses Community Fund. At Bread and Roses, we're Philadelphia's social justice fund, and we organize donors to move money to community organizers working on Change Not Charity. We run 4 core funds every year, Racial and Economic Justice Fund, a Gender Justice Organizing Fund, a Future Fund, and a Criminal Justice Initiative. And all of our money is given out through community-led decision-making processes. I first was in relationship with Bread and Roses as a member of the Giving Project, which is one of our community-led grant-making programs, and now I have the pleasure of managing our grants department, where we facilitate the design and decision making by community members for special funds that are not those 4 funds that I listed every year. I'm really glad to be here and be in this conversation.
Welcome, ladies. Damaris?
I think she's gone, Mitch.
Okay,
Damaris is
thank
trying to
you.
come back in.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, folks, for the technical difficulties. We'll try to reconnect as quickly as we can. But we want to get to our conversation. I also want to encourage audience members to put their questions in the chat. We'll try to answer them a little later and on to our discussion. So we've all seen big institutions and government say that they're listening to communities and valuing its input. And then they just do what they wanted to do in the first place. So what does authentic community participation and grant making mean to you and your organization, and how have you put that into practice or seen it put into practice? If you're compelled to say, give an example of how you've been a part of a process that didn't work, then you're welcome to share that as well. Why don't we start with Sarah?
Sure, thanks. Yeah, maybe the worst kind of process is a process that promises listening and then doesn't listen. Right? If you're not going to listen, at least don't promise you're going to. So I will talk about how we try to be authentic with community participation here at Bread and Roses. It's multi-level. We just try to be accountable. I think that's probably the biggest value. And so we try to be accountable both we've asked community members to help us set our priorities. That's how we got to a place where we fund community organizing, and we have a definition of community organizing that came from the organizers themselves. So we went to folks and asked them to help us set our priorities. They set the criteria for all of those 4 funds that I talked about that we run every year. And so they shape the information we're asking from applicants, right? And then we see our role as receiving information from applicants and packaging it and giving it to folks like Latrista who sit on our community grant making panels. We also, another way that we have authentic community participation is that we try to make space for both written application material and interviews. We're really trying to make sure that people are able to tell us their stories in ways that are best suit their storytelling abilities. And so that's another way that we invite folks to participate in the process of deciding how funds go out. And then we facilitate decision-making processes where everyone on the panel gets to, as long as they're not involved in the application, the organization that's applying gets to be in discussion and come to consensus around how the money goes out the door. So it really is multi-tiered, having folks help to set our broad strategy, our fund criteria, and then the actual decisions about which applications receive funding. So those are some of the practices, and we can definitely talk about lessons learned along the way too, but I'll cede and love to hear from other folks too.
Who'd like to go next?
I can answer that. So I think authentic community participation is having people from all aspects of the community. That doesn't, so you're not listening when you don't involve the whole community, right? So if you involve the people that are closest to the problem, the people that work in the area of the problem, and and the normal decision makers, then that is true community input. So I think that authentic grant making happens when you include the whole community. So when you're specific about who you include, then that doesn't happen. But most times, if not every time that I've sat on a community on a community grant making process, it was because there were people from all areas of the community that could speak to the work and be able to speak to, yeah, this is really happening, or yes, this is really a need.
Mhm. Caitlin, you'd like to go, and then we'll end with Damaris, allowing her to introduce herself and answer the question.
Yeah, absolutely. So I love everything that Sarah and Latrista just said. In addition, I think, I mean, really like trying to listen and learn and put your money where your mouth is. So, listening does require that you follow through. So that's just want to kind of like drive that point home. I think another thing that we really have tried to do is really think of our participatory grant making as a learning process as well. And that in the Community Fund for Immigrant Wellness in particular, we've tweaked the program every year and really kind of have worked hard to be reflective about what worked and what didn't. And I think that has allowed for us to be in more authentic relationship with our community advisory board and who is sort of in our decision-making circle, in that, we are really giving opportunity for everyone to have input into the process. Another element of that is that all of our grantees, we've always co-designed the reporting process with our grantees, which inevitably has typically looked like some sort of presentation or summit, with really grantees having the opportunity to talk about their story and showcase their work in, including art and, including the participants who have come through their programs to really present the work that was done, that was funded. And I think just one other thing I want to note here is that, our funds for the community fund are really focused on emotional health and well-being. So I think one of the things that is important is that we're upfront about the parameters that we have around those dollars, right? So that in being authentic, we're not over promising where the money could go and what the money can do, but that we're really honest and transparent with both the folks that we have asked to help us really shape the program, but also to the potential applicants.
Good morning. Do you hear me better? No.
We're going to soldier on.
My name is Marcy Sana. I work with the City of Philadelphia Managing Director's Office, Community Service. I am the Director of Community Relations and Strategic Initiative. And we have been working on a participatory grant making process for about 2 years now. We're about to embark on our 3rd year of grant giving. And it's called the Kensington Community Resilience Fund. And we'd like to say it is a fund for Kensington by Kensington, meaning that the individuals on the panel are Kensington residents, the individuals can write best about the community needs and can decide where these funds should go, and how best they can assist the community to thrive. What do I think is authentic participation grant making is giving the power and the voice back to the community. They know best what's happening in the community, and they should have the power to decide where the funding should go. In addition, and this should be part of every aspect of the process. They shouldn't be an afterthought. They should be brought into the process from the very beginning, when the process is being structured, give their feedback, be able to make changes, and then at the end decide where the monies or the grants should be given to communities, organizations, grassroots community organizations within their community. So I think that authentic participation process is really giving the power back and the voice to the community and implementing their feedback and making sure that they have the tools to make these decisions, making sure that there's no barriers to get into the end results, the outcomes that are so impactful for their community. And this would include even translation services into for the individuals who are non-speaking individuals, English-speaking individuals. So this is being able to make sure that they have every tool in their toolbox to make the best decision for the community. And us as the city or as the philanthropy network stepping back and allowing them to do what they need to do with the guidance and the principles and the goals. So I think that's authentic participation that is for me.
So audience, you see why Damaris's perspective is so important. Damaris, Solomon is going to reach out via chat to see if we can continue to work on your audio issues, but thank you for that. So we talked a little bit like about who should be at the table, right? How are we innovating in the process from the application process to co-design? We're moving into like, how are we looking at results and outcomes, right? Is what we sort of honor and see as outcomes or results different? What are the sort of decisions that around the participation and next steps? Do those things also include the community? So talk a little bit about what we see as success or not, and how that's how the community sort of participation has informed that. Caitlin, you want to take this one, start off?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I think that the process is a part of the outcome, right? Like that this is because really the goal is to include participation and have, as you said, authentic participation in this process, is that we have to be thinking about what does that really look like, and not only in sort of where did the money end up going, but also, did it coalesce a group around a particular issue, and is the group, are they collaborating well? Is the power actually being shared by the funders, and are community members really feeling like they have a say in the decision-making process? So I think, just recognizing that there is power in thinking about the process as an outcome in and of itself. But I also think that, for us, when we first embarked on the community fund, we had said, well, I think we have about $100,000, which is, for the foundation is about 10% of our annual grant making, to distribute among immigrant serving organizations. And I think the outcome of us saying, like, let's use a participatory process for this, and really, it made this so much bigger than what our initial goal was. And I think the outcomes are just so much more significant. We developed a pooled fund that invited other funders to join in sort of funding emotional health and well-being among immigrant and refugee communities. And I think we have this has become a multi-year project that I would like to believe that it would have been had we gone through sort of our more general grant making portfolio, but I'm not positive that it would have. And we certainly have built relationships with grassroots organizations that we just otherwise would not have. I think having a community advisory board at the table that also has, they themselves are many of whom are immigrants and refugees themselves, work deeply in immigrant and refugee communities, and also work with many partners in their communities, have really been able to get the word out about this funding. And have invited organizations that we just would not have gotten to know. And that has, led to some grants out of our general grant making portfolio that were based on relationships that we developed through the community fund. And it has also, I think, just seeing the success of this process has really helped us to think differently about our general LOI and grant application. It's helped us to think about supporting other participatory initiatives like the Kensington Community Resilience Fund, like the COVID Prevention and Response Fund that was run by Philanthropy Network that was really participatory in nature. And, using, maybe not in the using sort of grant making groups in other projects like our Policy Meets Practice initiative. So the ripple effects have been just so significant and beyond, I think, just what we funded, but also just thinking about generally how we fund, even if we think beyond just the participatory grants. Yeah.
Sarah, anything to add to that?
Sure. Yeah, I'll say a couple things about process and then a couple things about how we're measuring success. I think one success is that our applicants and community and grantees have helped to shift the how of the work. I think Caitlin was talking about this a little bit, right? So one change, or not change, one practice we have is that all of our funds are general operating funds, and so folks really just have to tell us about their mission and their plan for the year, and it's not project based, right? So that was helpful in times of disruption like COVID, right? Like no one had to come back and be like, well, 0 of the projects we said we were going to do, did we do, right? We're like, yeah, we're clear. It's cool. So there's that. We have. We have also, so we've changed, not that we've changed, we are structured in response to how folks want to be receiving the funding, how the funding is most helpful to support the organizing work. I will say that there have been, I think one sign of success is when those of us in positions of power, even though we're doing community-led grant making, my organization and the individuals here, we all hold power, right? When a result happens that we're like, oh, that I wouldn't have chosen that result, right? That's when you realize you've actually ceded power. There were a couple of examples of that, in one participatory grant making panel, the community chose to give a grant to an organization that had a really big budget. And I think wearing my sort of funder hat, I wouldn't have chosen that. And they were like, no, this is important because this is the beginning of our relationship with them. And then maybe, that their budget is an asset to us. And this moment is a way for us to, access that asset. And I would never have had that perspective, right? So super helpful for them to be able to make that choice. Similarly, with the Neighborhood Equitable Recovery Fund, which we were running with CEO, in the second round, folks really wanted to prioritize work that was helping with kids' mental health issues, right? And because they were on the ground and they saw that was a huge lack of funding, they prioritized moving a bunch of money there. And again, we didn't have that knowledge and information and perspective. And so it was really helpful to just, it's good when you're surprised by the outcome because it means that, you've brought perspectives into the process that needed to be there and wouldn't have been otherwise. So that's what I'll say about redefining success. when you're surprised, it's good.
Latrice, I want to pivot the question a little bit for you, right? So how does an organization need to show up to be informed by community to redefine success, right? What is the best way an organization can show up and working with the community when we talk about what we want to get out of this? How are we meeting the needs of the folks most impacted by these decisions and this funding opportunity? And even when, how do organizations show up that you know it's not going to work and you have to work through? So any of those examples would be helpful.
Yeah, so I don't know if this directly answers your question, but when Sarah was talking, I was thinking about it. So during the NERF process, and during COVID, food insecurity was like a big thing across the city. And I remember when we were going through that grant process and everybody's grant was about food insecurity. And I was the one, so I'm sure there's lots of organizations on here I'm at 63rd and Haverford. You can come beat me up. I was the one, right? Saying, but isn't everybody getting the food for free? Like, why are we giving grants for this? Like, isn't everybody getting their food from, the programs that give out food? And so it became like a big back and forth. And it was just like, are we only going to fund food here? And so it was helpful that there were people who were a part of the process that could educate me that yes, there are programs that give you food to give out, but they don't give enough. You have to have somewhere to store the food, so you have to pay for shelving and all those different things. But if I would have just been alone in my thought that, okay, food insecurity is a thing, but I think we're taking this too far, a lot of those organizations that were doing good work and had justified budgets would not have been funded just because I live in my own little bubble and I do the work that I do and I didn't understand their work. So I think it's important. That's goes back to like why community grant making is important, because you have those community members that aren't afraid to say, no, Latrice, you're wrong. Like, this is why this is needed. And then going more towards showing up. Because now we're going through community grant making, I think it's good just to really be doing the work. Because I'm also the one that if I sit on a committee, I work hard over here. I can't speak for everybody else, but there's hard work happening over here. So if I'm sitting on a committee and I'm reading a grant and I know you don't do the work that you say you do in that grant you wrote, I'm the one who's going to say, they don't do this. Like, this is great, but they don't do this. This sounds good on paper, but this is not what's happening over there. And so show up and be authentic, just like you want the people who are making the decisions about the grant to be authentic. I think that this process brings us to a point where we have to be authentic in our grant writing. So if it's something that you plan on doing, you're writing about the work that you plan on doing. But if it's something that you're doing, you explain it in a way so those of us who know what's really going on in the community can speak to that. An example is I received personally, my organization received a grant where we were the smallest organization out of all the organizations that received the funding. We have the smallest budget, we were the smallest organization, but there was someone on that committee making that decision that believed that we could do the work. And so she was able to say, like, no, they can do what she wrote, they can do. And we were able to do that work and prove to that funder that we could do that work. And I don't think that next time when that grant comes up, it would be such a struggle because we were able to prove that. And so I think that the best way for all organizations is to just show up and be authentic, write about the things that you are really doing. In these community circles, you don't have to, and this is what I love about Bread and Roses, it's not about perfect grammar when we're reading the grants. It's not about, did you spell every word right? Sometimes it's not even about, does this budget look perfect, right? It's us really knowing like the heart of the work that you do. And this is what they meant by the budget, right? This is what they were trying to tell us. So if you just show up and be who you are authentically, you don't have to hire a grant writer or any of that other stuff. Your work will speak for itself.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And just a bit of unsolicited advice. If somebody invites you to come see them at 63rd Street, you probably don't want to do that. So you might choose a strongly worded email. Damaris.
I'm just gonna give it to you. It was just a joke.
Damaris, jump on in.
Let's try this again, Mitch. Do you hear me better? No, at all? You don't hear me at all?
It sounds a little better. You're not.
Go ahead. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it.
I'm so sorry. Today, none of my.
Oh, wait.
Oh, you hear me better?
Yes.
Yes.
Excellent.
Great. So for us, the residents we have had impactful results. They all stated that they love that they're being heard and they're able to voice their opinions. And we have so many impactful results of the participatory grant making process. And how do we define or measure success? Is the end result, the outcome. We want sustainable outcomes, right? Successful, sustainable outcomes. And when the community members are able, residents are able to do this, it's going to be sustainable because it's what they want in their community. We are able to fund a really hyper-local grassroots organizations that otherwise wouldn't be wouldn't receive any fundings. And one of the measures that we is successful is that we were able to bring funders to the table and highlight the work that these grassroots organizations are doing. And even the funders are saying, wow, we didn't know that this was going on, and they were doing the work already on the ground. So they're able to highlight their work, highlight their organizations. And one thing about the grant participatory grant process is it creates cohesiveness and understanding between the residents. So here we have two sides, residents that are harm reductionists and residents that they're not harm reductionists. So how do you level that, right? How do you come to a consensus? And they were able to do that. They were able to listen to each other, respect each other's opinions, challenge each other's opinion. And at the end, they came to the conclusion, although we're in different sides, we want the same thing. What we want is the same thing as the end goal. So how are we going to get there? And that contributed to the decision making on what grants best fit their community, their needs. And it also gave them another level of respect for each other's work. So I think that's how we measure success, or I measure success in this process.
So we're going to give you a little bit more airtime, especially in light of the audio issues. So Damaris, talk a little bit about, like, you certainly have been on the other side of government, working directly in community. You have strong ties in sort of the communities that you serve and work with, for sure, on multiple levels. How do you balance those authentic realities now being in government and being able to still sort of build trust, maintain trust, and work authentically with these partners, even from your seat in government?
Great question, because we were actually talking about beforehand. I came into city government with working with trust. For me, in everything I do, I got to gain the trust of the residents. You know that residents don't really trust government, right? Because of the question you asked before. They say we listen, and we don't do anything. It's like it's on the back burner with their feedback. So I don't ever try to overpromise, and I'm very transparent. I have the conversation, the open conversation. This is what I can do. This is what I can't do. And they really like that. They really like that I am authentic, that I don't overpromise, that I tell them how it is. And then I also try to give them, if we can't do this, I can't promise you this, let's go this avenue and let's try it this way. So, and honestly, I don't take it personally. They're not mad at me. They're not upset with me. They're upset with the system. So it's not personal to me, you know? So I try to keep that relationship and establish that relationship, keep that relationship with the residents. And I think the basis of it all is trust, because as I am an agent of the city of Philadelphia, I work for the city of Philadelphia, but I am also human. I am also human, and I could put myself in the shoes of the residents because I am a Philadelphia resident, born and raised. So I think that putting all those different elements together and just being you, you earn their trust. You won't earn, I'm gonna be honest with you, you won't earn it from one day to another. It takes time. It takes time for them to trust you. And you also, once you have that trust, it's like golden, because anything you do and you break that trust, you can break the trust quicker than you earn it. So you really have to maintain that relationship and be honest and be the true you. So that's how I think I balance it out. My colleagues and counterparts can probably put in add some more information to it.
Anyone else want to take a shot at that before I go into the next question? Cool. So just building on that, the issue of trust, right? As we forge out into brave spaces, right, there's always the possibility of committing harm, even unintentionally, right? And so and it's a risky proposition for our community partners too, because they're coming in skeptical and, is there a catch? I don't really know you. Are you going to blame me for if this doesn't work, right? Or, am I going to be left holding the blame bag and so forth and so on? And so how do you sort of prevent harm in some of your planning, and some of your ideation work, keep on refining what it is you do? When you commit harm, how do you repair, right? And say, oops, my bad. It's hard trying to do things new or different. I didn't see it. That was a blind spot, or I didn't mean it. Or how do you sort of resist that patriarchal approach where you are in protective mode? Like you have to protect and watch out and cover. And when folks have the capacity and resiliency to withstand and perform even in struggling environments. So anybody want to take a crack at that?
I'll
Sarah,
jump
you want to go ahead? Go ahead.
So when things like that are bound to happen, you can't avoid it, right? You think you're doing the right thing and you go in with one approach and it just backfires. It happens. Again, we're human. But the thing that we have to remember is that we make mistakes in whatever capacity we're in, and be able to, like you said, say, I own it. I made a mistake. I apologize. How can we work together to move forward? What can I do to, I can't never make it up, right? But we can work together to gain your trust again, to do better. And I think those are conversations that are difficult when you do mess up, but it takes an honest person to say, I did mess up and I take the accountability for that. How can we work together to move forward for the better of the good? And so I think that owning up to your mistake is key. It's key, and being able to apologize, because it takes a big person to do that, right? In the protective mode, it's really hard, especially when you're working with the community, because you tend to want to protect them, that you kind of build a wall, and it sometimes takes a toll on you. So you have to measure that and say, and balance it out and say, you know what, how can I do this and have that boundary? How can I protect the residents and advocate for the residents? And also remember that I'm an agent of the city of Philadelphia, right? So it's, again, a balancing act. And I think you learn something new every day, because you don't come into this job or any job knowing everything. So I think you learn something new every single day and you build on that.
Let's hear from others. This is great. Thank you, Damaris.
Damaris, I love everything you just said. And I think, coming from the standpoint of philanthropy, let's be honest, philanthropy is not known for being self-aware or reflective necessarily. And I think just really engaging in that reflection. And I just echo everything Damaris just said, like really owning up to when you've made mistakes. Our first cycle of the community fund, we had our community advisory board. They helped to shape the grant making process. They were able to apply and take part in the decision making of where the grant dollars actually went. And it was messy. And I think as we worked through all of that with that group, we were able to come to a new process in which the Community Advisory Board nominated decision-making group members who were of the community to actually be the ones to review grants and make decisions about where the grant dollars went, and that we would do some separation of the decision-making individuals and individuals who could apply, to kind of clean up some of the conflicts of interest. And making that change has been just, I think, transformational for the fund. And I think, just recognizing like, ooh, this doesn't quite work, and being reflective about what that looks like. And then to Damaris's point, working with the group that it just kind of didn't work with well, and moving forward with humility to say like, okay, we can do something different. Let's try something new. And then sometimes the things you try that are new don't quite work either. So it's just this constant tweaking, kind of building the ship while you're on it, and being open to that process. And I think too, like when you come to this work with that view of learning and being open-minded, it is more exciting. And you really do get the chance to, learn something new every day, and be engaged in a more authentic, relationally based way.
We're running short on time here, so I want to share out a few questions from the audience, and give folks a chance to answer some questions. So I'm going to ask a couple questions and give folks an opportunity to choose what question they'd like to answer. So a question here from Erica: does participatory grant making process focus on building out sustainable community practices that allow marginalized community members to be trained and educated so communities can leverage themselves politically and advocate for specific needs? Another question is, how are initial community members, community informants identified or selected from the very beginning to avoid top-down process at the first step? I think it's a great question. Would this panel, anyone on this panel or any organization represented, consider building out a board that is representative of community members and those most directly impacted, nonprofit representatives, or other engaged leaders to form participatory grant making? Or do you consider participatory grant making as existing outside of the board structure? How does it tie into organizational decisions and oversight? Let's start there.
I can answer the first two questions from a Bread and Roses perspective. One is that absolutely we see community grant making panels as an opportunity for investing in community members. So everyone who comes in gets training, right? We do some political education, we do grant making training. We want folks to walk away from the process with new skills and new relationships, because both of those things are, I think, building blocks in successful organizing. And I will say the other thing about, 100% agree with the question of like, having a community panel is all good and well, but you have to be thoughtful about how you form it. And so I would say, like, I don't think there's one right way. I think, we have done ones where we solicit applications from folks. We have done, I think having folks be able to come in from different pathways is helpful, right? Like soliciting applications. We always have the goal of having the panels be demographically at least as diverse as Philadelphia's demographics are. So I always shoot for that. We have people come in through relationships. It's just like being open to meeting folks and having folks come in ways that are not your current practices is always helpful, right? So that's what I'll say about both. Yes, absolutely, you need to be thoughtful about how you form the community grant making panels, and investing in folks so that they walk away not having just served the process, but being able to take resources back to their individual work and their community work.
Great, thank you. Anyone else?
So I'll address 1 and 2, and I just got to start by saying that I agree with my counterpart Sarah. You have to be very intentional on on how you want to recruit the committees, the members for the committees. And for the Kensington Resilience Fund, we have 2 committees. We have the overarching advisory community board, and then we had the grant decision making board. So the overarching members, we were very geographical and made sure that we had a combination of the CDCs within the community of Kensington, within the certain border. And we also had community members and civic leaders, faith-based organization leaders, and all we had approximately 15 individuals on that board. And this is the board that they came up with the structure, they came up with the grants amount, they had the principles, and they were Bread and Roses actually facilitated this process where they had a process and they went through the structures and our principles, and they based even the application on those guidelines. Then what we tried to do was recruit for the decision-making process, the individuals who are actually going to review the application through different forms. We did it as referral-based. We also did it through a meeting that I host on a monthly basis called the Barrios Nuestros. It is within Kensington, and it encompasses individuals from the Fairhurst section, Harrogate, and the Kensington section of Philadelphia. So we also got some applications from that meeting. And then we were able, with Bread and Roses, go through the applications and figure out, because we did have criteria, and one of the criteria you had to live within the border of Kensington in one of those neighborhoods that I just mentioned, or you have to have work in an organization within that parameters. So we went through the requisites, and we made sure that every region was covered with someone, a representative on our board. On our committee. So yes, you have to be very strategic and intentional so that you won't forget the voice of anyone in the community. We also had individuals that were not English speaking on the panel. We provided translations, interpreters. We translated every single PowerPoint, every single grant, so they'd be able to really be involved with the process and not be left behind. So that's the way we did it. We were very intentional. We also put a timeline. They were able to be on the committee for 2 years, 2 cohort cycles, and then they move on. The other thing that we did, and we're actually doing our second cohort, it's almost ending, is the community learning. And this is for the individuals who received the grants. The individuals that are on the committees, as Sarah stated, they do get training through the process, but then we wanted to do something for the individuals that received the grant. So we didn't want to do, okay, here goes the grant, and then you could just move on. We wanted to engage them. And what we also found out was that within our first cohort and our second cohort, some of the programs and some of the individuals that received the grant did not know about each other. To collaborate, to work together. And what we found was, wait a minute, so we have Mad Beats, who's a youth organization, and then we have the Powerhouse, which is a theater organization. You guys can really work together, and you guys can join forces. So what we did was the community learning, which we have a consultant who does different trainings, and we combined the 2 groups. And in December, we're actually going to have a networking event where all our cohorts are going to come together so they can meet each other, learn from each other, and really combine forces and work together, collaborate. So those are things that we don't want it to be a one-shot thing. We want to continue. So that's what we have been doing.
Thank you. So we had a lot of great questions in the chat. My apologies for not being able to get to all of those. I know we are past time. but we want to live up to our commitment for an hour for this event. And we started 10 minutes late because of technical issues. And so I do want to get to Latrista and others to really talk about the future of this work. And so when we talk about BIPOC futurism, Afrofuturism, right, the futuristic sort of mindset, you know, what can we imagine about the real value or opportunity that this work presents? When we look at Philadelphia 20 years from now, what should Philadelphia be doing in regards to community-driven, trust-based grant making? Latrista, you want to jump off?
Wow, that's an intense question, but I will try. First, in 20 seconds, I see a lot of questions that are about like being a 501c3, having a fiscal sponsor, all that good stuff. So I'm going to break the rules, not answer the question right away and just respond to that. So the Elevation Project is a fiscally sponsored organization. So don't believe because you don't have your own 501c3, you can't get funding. For us, we're a very small organization, so it's easier to let someone else handle the really important stuff. And so the people who choose to do that, don't believe that you're on here. These organizations won't fund you because of that. You just need to work with your fiscal sponsor to make sure that you are completing grant applications correctly. Back to your question, I think that the future is in this process because nobody knows better who is doing the work than the people who are doing that. And I know I said that in the beginning, but I think that if more grant making or funding was done this way, that it could make a really big difference in community. There are a lot of smaller Black-led, people of color led, all those different terms that we use, organizations that are doing the work directly on the ground, who are not politically connected and don't have someone in this office that they can call, right? And because of that, they're not funded. And I think that that as long as we continue to go in this work in this way, and we continue to have grassroots people in those meetings making those decisions about who gets the money, that we would see great work being done. People can do great work without funding, right? But people can do greater work with funding. And so we cannot take away from the fact that, you know, I sit in this building and the lights are on and it costs money to keep the lights on. It costs money to run programs. It costs money. And when people say, well, I don't get funded by the city, you know, that's not really anything to brag about. We need to figure out like why the city doesn't fund you, right? Or why don't organizations give you funding? Because it's not really like a bragging point, because you could do greater work if you were funded by the city. You could do greater work if you were funded by Bread and Roses or Scattergood Foundation or any other foundation. So it is important. I also think that if you're a nonprofit leader and you're sitting on this call, it's important for you to sit on the other side. I had a greater understanding of grant making when I sat on a committee that made the decisions. And so it influenced the way that I wrote grants. So the future looks different when we all sit on these committees, because then we know what to write. We know what funders are looking for. We understand the process better. So I think that that is a key element of the future, is all of us finding a way to get on the committees that make the decisions. And the only way you know that is to look at, when you look at their website and you look at how they're funding, maybe instead of applying that time, you call and you say, can I sit on the committee that makes the decision? Maybe you still apply. With Bread and Roses, you can still apply, but when it comes to your grant, you just don't get to participate in the decision. So I think that I say it all the time. So it's just like my go-to thing. As long as we all continue to do the work hard, and then participate in the process, that is what the future looks like. They can't leave us out when we bring our own chair and throw ourselves at the table.
So we'll leave the conversation there. Latricia, thank you. Sarah, Caitlin, Damaris, all of you who stuck with us today, all 105 or 100 of you that are still here, thank you for participating. We'll send out information after this, the recording of today's presentation, but also some supplemental information. We appreciate your partnership and your community and having this brave conversation. Have a great day.